I'm Neil. My wife Beth and I look after two siblings with FASD, Lena and Michael, and they are great children and been a real pleasure to have around, and it's a great privilege to have been able to do so. Well, the good thing about these two is that they are just so bright and happy, and they just want to be part of the family. They just want to be part like everybody else. When she first started at school 4 years ago, it took the school a good 2 years, one, to understand her and to realise that the supports we'd put in place also needed to be put in place at school. And so she started her schooling as one of the worst children they'd ever seen, and now 4 years later sits in class and is just a very, very normal child sitting there doing the best she can.
I think there needs to be more work done within education services to understand that some of the behaviours that are manifest in children in their classrooms are actually behaviours arising from them struggling to learn and remember, not being willfully naughty. And that important change in perspective is not yet, I think, easily understood.
So what day is it today, do you know? Visual cues are an amazing aid for these children because it helps them understand without being under pressure. These kids have trouble with instructions, but a picture is plain and basic, and it gives them the opportunity then to be able to do it. So today is Thursday and it's raining, so what will tomorrow be?
Friday. Those children are successful because of Neil and because of the nurture and the love and the healing that he's enabled and the advocacy that he's undertaken. So they're very blessed to have some of his capacity and fire to walk beside them. Yeah.
The more support you get, the more likely you are to be successful. And we have a fantastic round of social workers and psychs and speech therapists and OTs, and they have all made an amazing difference. The thing about these kids is they just want to be like everybody else. And if you get more people to understand that, all these children and their parents would be better off. Well, good morning all. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the land that we are presenting on today, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. And just make note that my two that are shown there are not Noongar children. They're actually Whadjuk children from way up north of WA, up in the Kimberley region. So it's unusual for me to actually have to give acknowledgement to country, because usually my little bloke's standing around and he does it so well, it's unbelievable. So I also want to make a clarification about some of the things that were in that video. Well, one particular point is that we have 11 children in our household, and we do not consider those children that are fostered as being anything other than our children. I'm not their carer, I'm not their foster father, I'm their dad. They've been with us for Michael all his life, for one of his oldest brothers all his life, and for the others, such as Lena, he's now been with us for a bit over 9 years. So, having watched Hayley's presentation again and seen that video, I just want to say thank you, Hayley, for everything you do for FASD people, because it makes an amazing difference. And I watched that video and it just reminds me of what my kids go through every day. That difficulty, that noise, that information overload that goes through them, the difficulty to try and understand, remember and go through all those things. They have those issues all day, every day. And so it's very, very difficult. So these are my two FASD children that I'm going to talk about. As I said, I have 4 other foster children and 5 biological children. And I think it's fair to say 2 of my biological children are the reason I'm such a strong advocate, probably particularly for these 2. They taught me a lot. They had a lot of difficulties themselves. So before I got to my foster children, I understood how difficult it can be. But I also realised from their journey that just because you have difficulties and you have learning issues does not mean that you can't be successful. And they were lucky. Their learning journeys were interrupted by issues that could be dealt with quite easily, and they've both gone on to be very, very successful. People working in the health department, running large departments within 2 of our major hospitals. So it taught me a lot about not being put back by what people say can happen or should happen. And so when we first started on the FASD journey, I think that statement that it's a huge mountain couldn't be more true. But sadly, everything I read about that was that the mountain was so high that you couldn't possibly climb up. And a lot of those things that are happening in Banksia and a lot of the things that have been in the paper of late were the only alternative for these kids and for kids like my kids. But I'm a bit of a dog with a bone, and I don't take no lightly. So I couldn't believe that everything I'd read said that really there was no hope for these kids. You might as well wrap them in a brown paper bag and throw them in the bin. There's just nothing but sad news for them. I thought, well, that can't possibly be right. Can't possibly give in that easy. And hopefully what will happen over the next 30 minutes is I will show you that not only is it not right, it's completely the opposite. There is huge hope for these kids, but we just have to think out of the box. We have to look at it as dealing with it in a completely different manner. So my 2 were, and someone asked about foster children, adoption, about getting diagnosed. So my 2 have never been with their mother. It's a very sad scenario. Mum's in a very dark place, and it's a very sick person, and there was no physical way she could look after her children, and that's how they ended up in our care. But we understood why she was in that place, and that was documented, and so we were able to get them diagnosed, and that made a massive difference. And it did open a lot of doors for us. It sent us off in a direction of which we could go and find out what the difficulties were for the kids and how best to treat them. When they came to us, and so Michael's been with us for just over 10 years and Lena for 9 years. I knew about FASD, but I didn't understand anything about it really. I knew what caused it. I knew it was a disability, and that was pretty much it. And now I understand so much more, and Telethon were probably the first people I reached out to who drew me in and pointed me in the right direction and gave me the opportunity to look into it further and find out exactly what happened. But before we go down that track, I think it's very important to understand that for all people with children with any sort of disability, be it physical or neuro or otherwise, it's a constant battle, and we have to consider that at all times. And as Hayley said, it's the most important thing for all carers is to look after yourself, because it's a constant fight. It's a constant battle to get people to understand. It's a constant battle to get services, to get medical and physical intervention, therapy that will suit your child and will help your child reach the goal that it is capable of reaching. But I think more than anything, and the thing that keeps me awake at night is that constant wonder of, have I fought hard enough? Have I looked under enough rocks? Have I turned enough things over? Have I done enough to make my children's journey the best it possibly can be? And having been a mainstream parent, I understand what that's like for mainstream parents, but now I also understand what it's like for parents with a child with a disability. How much that fights you internally as much as anything, and how tiring it can be. I'm extremely lucky. I have 3 adults, including myself at home, and we have a very strong support base around us that, as saw in that video, that has helped make the journey far more successful than it probably is for most parents, and that's something I think is wrong. And our aim for coming and giving talks like this is to stop that 80% chance of kids like mine ending up in Banksia or similar sort of places, because those statistics and that information that Telethon found out, that is unacceptable. That is unacceptable in the absolute highest order, and we all have to take responsibility to change it. And hopefully you'll see from this journey that I have a great belief that you can change it. It can be changed. It can be made completely differently. So my little bloke started like this. So he came to us at 4.5 months. He's a living, walking, talking miracle. And I don't say that lightly. He was born 7 weeks prem, massive hole in the heart. Mum sadly came into the hospital saying she had a stomach ache at 11 o'clock. Doctor said, I think it might be a little bit more than a stomach ache. She said, I can't possibly be pregnant. And around about 2 o'clock she gave birth. At 4 o'clock she signed the papers. At 5 o'clock she was gone from the hospital, never to be seen again. And at 10 years of age, unfortunately, despite our best efforts, he's only met her once. And there are lots of reasons for that, and none of them are great, but we continue to work and stay in contact with her and try and follow where her life is travelling, but it's very hard to make the connection for her. So as I said, he was born with a hole in the heart, so he was rushed down to Perth. At 6 weeks he had a massive brain bleed, a major stroke, ended up with cerebral palsy. Out of that issue, when he was operated on, they had to then wait till 4 months before they could operate on him, till he got strong enough to survive the operation. They weren't extremely confident that he was going to survive the operation. The nurses and doctors, particularly the nurses who'd spent a lot of time with him, all came and said goodbye, because the reality was he was not expected to survive. We got a phone call, said that if he survives, could he come to our place for 6 weeks while he recouped. We had a medical training and background, and they said that he needed to go to someone who had that information. So we said yes, of course. And 2 weeks later, we picked him up, and even though we had to fight very difficult to get him out of the hospital because the nurses weren't too happy about giving him up. And it took a bit of convincing. It actually took us 2 days to get him out of the hospital, even though we had a piece of paper said that's where he had to go. But eventually he came home, and we straight away realised that apart from the operation and the heart issue, that he had lots of things in front of him, and he's gone on to be diagnosed. He's got microcephaly. They said he's got cerebral palsy, he's got ADHD, he's got ASD, he's got an intellectual disability. And despite all those things, he's the toughest, most incredible being I've ever had the privilege of dealing with. And I have, over my time, had interaction with thousands of children because I've done untold sports coaching. I'm a bit of a sports fanatic, and I love to coach kids and see them thrive. And this kid has more courage and determination than all those other kids put together. He's an amazing, amazing being. And this is where he is today. So when we picked him up, I distinctly remember the nurses saying to us, so, you know, the reality is he probably won't talk and he almost certainly won't walk. And it's okay, I know where that nurse lives and I'm going to get her one day because now he never shuts up and never stops running. So, to such great extent that we just got back from Tasmania, who represented WA at the Special Olympics and won a bronze medal and a gold medal for running the 100 metres. So he is, as I said, a true, without a doubt, living, walking miracle. He shouldn't be here. And he's surviving in a mainstream school. Sure, he gets lots of support, but he's in a mainstream school, does mainstream sport, can never win because he weighs 17 kilos wringing wet with all his clothes on at 10 years of age. Would be, on average, I'd say he'd be half the size of the next smallest kid in his classroom. But that doesn't stop him because he'd be twice the size with determination. And that's the thing to remember about these kids. Sure, they've got lots of difficulties. Sure, there are lots of problems. Sure, there are lots of mountains to climb. But no one is more capable of climbing those mountains than these kids because they're just determined. They want to be just like everybody else. And that's where most of these kids go to. So we've lost the pickup. So as we go on, the situation from having him with us meant that we ended up with his sister. His sister placement collapsed. And so about 12 months after Michael came to live with us, we tried to get them reconnected. And we couldn't do so, and we found out it's because the placement collapsed. So we put our hand up, and after a bit of toing and frying and fighting with the department, Lena came to live with us about 12 months later. Now, the problem when Lena came to us is that it was quite clear that she also had FASD. And it's pretty common that it doesn't matter what the situation is, if a mum's in the state she was during their pregnancy, sadly, I think it's fair to say that the only time they weren't exposed to alcohol in utero was probably either when she had no money or was asleep. So it was a pretty tough start for them. Lena's start was extremely tough. She had 4 years. Well, I think in the last 12 months before, we were her fourth placement in 12 months. There'd been lots of traumatic issues in those placements, and so she came to us extremely depressed. And I only realised sort of a couple of years later just how difficult it can be, that trauma and that depression for these kids. And it probably took us 2 years to decipher between her what was trauma and what was FASD and what was personality. Because she's certainly got a personality that is quite incredible. Very, very quiet, unassuming child, but an amazing, amazing personality and very adept at working out who's who and who's in charge. So after a couple of years we saw, and the first 2 years with Lena was probably as toughest thing as anything I've ever done. So very, very difficult. So her behaviour at home and in general life was atrocious, terrible. It was a 24-hour, 3-person job, and at nearly, certainly at different stages, particularly for my wife and I, at different stages we sat on the bed in our bedroom and said, can't go any further. But lucky, when one was down, the other picked them up and said, well, come on, you know, there's got to be light at the end of the tunnel, there's got to be some possibility, you know, we're the adults here, grow up, let's get on with it. And thankfully it never got to the point where we were both sitting on the ground, otherwise it would have been a disaster. But somehow we got through it, and after about 2 years, we saw some changes. And the photo on the left is Lena the day she came to our house. And as you can see, she's got that very troubled, very worried, very concerned look. Is this another house, another place that was going to let her down? Certainly she had every reason to think that. But like I said, lucky for us, and my wife is very similar. We don't take no for an answer. We're not easily put off. And I'm certainly, I think most people would say that I'm a bit fanatical when it comes to doing things, probably a little bit too fanatical, but I think in her case, it might have made the difference. So as I said, a couple of years later, we saw some changes, and now we're sort of getting to this. This fellow's a couple of years old, and she's now gone on to high school. And the fact that she's at high school, in a mainstream high school, in a private college, she might be the worst student academically at that college, and that wouldn't surprise me. But every time I get a report back, I get the report back that she's probably the best behaved student in that college. And that's a bit like Michael's ability to walk and run. That's a miracle. Because Lena's first 2 years at school were disastrous. Unmitigatedly disastrous. In actual fact, I would suggest academically in the first 2 years at school, she learned absolutely nothing. Not a thing. Not ABC, not 1, 2, 3. I remember them saying to me, she can count to 10 and put the numbers up. And I said, now jumble all the numbers up, put them in different order and ask her to go and get 4. And by that stage, in the 4th position was number 7, and she went and picked number 7. And I said, see, the problem for her is that she knows where it should be, but she doesn't know what it looks like. She doesn't understand that. And she's fooled all you because she's told you she can count. But she can't count. We know that because we see the results of that at home. And so those sort of things were the obstacles we had at school. But after about 2 years, I got a phone call one day, and the principal rang me and he said, come and pick her up, we've had enough. We're done. She's the worst child, and he was a 60-year-old principal, been a teacher for nearly 40 years. He said, come and pick her up, we just never met a child like it, never had a child like it. We can't deal with her. Worst child I've ever seen in my whole schooling life. So I went to the school and I said, go in the classroom and collect her. I went down to the classroom, the teacher's sitting outside, sitting on the bricks, leaning against the wall, head in hands, crying. I've gone in the classroom, my daughter's crawling around the floor, tipping over everybody's desk, kids are running around screaming, there's 2 education assistants in the room, each on their computer in the corner pretending nothing was happening. Never seen chaos like it in my life. So it was just unbelievable that much could happen in a classroom. So I walked in the classroom, I grabbed her attention, she went and sat down on the only desk that was now still standing, and ironically that was hers. You don't tip your own desk over, why would you? That wouldn't serve any purpose. So there wasn't a single desk left standing at that stage. There was books and pencils and absolute chaos everywhere. So I told her to start behaving, and I said to the teacher, you can take that 2 ways. She's either frightened witless of me or she wants to do what you want, and she's happy to do what I need. And you have to change that attitude, and you can decide which way you think that is, but she doesn't look too frightened to me. So I went back up to the principal and I said, well, the good news is she's not going. It's time for you to man up, grow up. You're 6 foot tall, you're an adult, she's 2 foot tall, she couldn't hurt you if you gave her a machete and a machine gun. Seriously, do your job. Listen to what you're told, find out what you need to do and change the classroom. And I guess 2 things could have happened from that. He could have said, well, you can go bite your proverbial, but he didn't. He chose to say, well, all right, well, what do we have to do? There were probably good reasons for that, because he and I had a relationship outside of school from our youth, our teenage days, playing football against each other. I think the last thing he wanted to do was know that I might be winning. So he stood up, he did. He became a man. He said, what do we do? So we started to put in process, a change in the classroom. It was only 6 weeks to go in her second year, so it made no difference for that 6 weeks. Damage was done. As I said to those teachers, the problem for my child is she's the worst academical student here, but she's the smartest person in this classroom. Only you don't realise. So she's sitting there and she's working out what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and how she can play one against the other, and how she can manipulate the situation so you can't show up her weaknesses. And that's going to be the way it is unless you change the way you deal with her. So as I said, it was the end of the year. The new teacher sat down with me for several hours, and we went through, and I gave her a pile of books about so high. And she went home and she studied and she read and she learnt. She made her husband read all the books so she could test to see if the program worked for him and whether she was on the right track. She went back to school the next year, and 6 weeks into the year we had, as I said in that video, we had a little girl sitting in the classroom, still probably the worst academic child in the classroom, but engaged, listening, trying to do her very best. And from that point on, she went on to win the Year 3 award a year later for the best effort in the classroom, and graduated that primary school and won the Endeavour Award. And I think her Year 6 report said that sadly for the school, they would miss Lena dearly because she was the glue that put the classroom together and many of the school projects together, because she was the bright energy, the high effort, really great personality, funny kid that made everybody work together and made everybody's day happier. Didn't mention a lot about how good she was at maths and English for some reason or other, but to us, I think the important thing is to understand is success can be viewed in so many ways. And success can be winning the ducks at the school, but success can also be just sitting there and doing the best you can. And if you see that and you're willing to accept that, then you can see great success. And all that came from diagnosis. All that came from us understanding what we needed to do and what we needed to put in place. And it doesn't change how you feel about that child, and it doesn't change who that child is. FASD does not define or make my children. It's something they have to live with every day, but it's not who they are. Okay, we make sure that they do the best they can at the best they are for everything they do. And the results don't matter. The effort is what counts. Now, there are all those misconceptions about these children that says it doesn't matter how hard you try or what you do, you can't help them. Well, I'm here to tell you that's absolute rubbish. You can take all those misconceptions up there and you can chuck them all in the bin. My kids will go out and they will give absolutely everything every time. Most times it's nowhere near good enough. And if we're considering getting 99% of the test as being successful, then they've got no hope. But if we're considering the fact that they sit there and they do that test and they do it to the best of their ability, they try to answer all those questions, even if they get every last one of them wrong, then that is success. That is success for these kids, and that, if acknowledged, can change the view to how they see life and how people around them see life. And when my young bloke goes out and runs, of course he's not going to win a race against an able-bodied child. All those children, one of those children he runs against is almost 1.5 times his weight and size. That kid runs up the track, he does 90 steps to do 100 metres. My young bloke does about 900. So of course he's not going to win. But it's not about winning. And he knows that. It's about putting your head down, running as fast as you can. And as we said, the important thing is as you cross that line, you've left nothing on the track and you flash that big white smile, and that's all we care about. And he does that. and that changes the way people perceive him. And that's the way you've got to think about these kids. They're different. Harley said, you've got to change the way you parent all these kids. You've got to put those structures into place. And I wouldn't want to live in our house, to be perfectly honest. It's not something I would recommend for anybody. So we make our kids, it's not so much now, they've got a lot better, but when they sat in the same place to have every meal, they had the same plate, the same knife and fork at the same time. Like we even go to the point that their meal will be dished up in the same order to everybody in the household. Because if you don't have structure and routine, you don't have any chance for these kids. Because they don't deal with change very well. But if you can take that away from them, and take that stress away and create a scenario where they can be successful, then all of a sudden you get a different attitude. You get a different person in the house. And like I said, we started out with, the first 2 years I've played 300 games of football, and I don't think anybody would be brave enough to have said I wasn't reasonably courageous, because if you would have, I would have snarled you behind the play, because that's the sort of time and era I played in. But one day with Lena took more courage than all those 300 games put together. It's tough. It was tough. And the number of times I had to get up off the ground and pick myself up and say what I said to that principal, man up. You're the adult here. You can win, but you've got to change the way you do it. And eventually, and we didn't even see it really, one day we sort of sat down and we went, you notice that we haven't had a tantrum today. It was probably usually a bad thing, because we'd get one within 15 minutes from that. But it went from Lena's tantrums, when she got to us, she might have 4 a day, and they might last 2-3 hours. Her best effort was and I was working from home in those days, she stood in my office and she tantrumed for about 4 to 5 hours non-stop. And I had to sit there and continue working and not be engaged and not lose my cool and not fight or confront her in any way. Simply say to her every now and then, when you calm down, we'll talk about it and we'll get back to life. But you cannot engage with these kids. You cannot fight them, because they don't understand the consequences of fighting. And that's the problem for most educational systems, is that they think that confrontation and I'm the boss is the way to educate. But that doesn't work. It doesn't work for these kids, and for so many of these kids. And the irony of that teacher that changed her life, that changed her schooling life, was that she changed it playing Scrabble. Didn't change it by yelling at her. Didn't change it by giving her time out. Didn't make an example of her. She simply changed it by sitting down with her for 1 hour a day while the rest of the kids were doing Italian. And I said to the principal, don't teach my daughter Italian. She's already learning Yaru, which is her traditional language, and she has enough trouble with English. Teach her English. Spend the time doing something that's going to benefit in the future. So that teacher sat down with her and played Scrabble with her. I haven't seen much, except that what would be a better way to learn English than Scrabble. But the other thing what it did was, one, it made my daughter realise that teacher had an interest in her, because she was willing to sit down and play a game. And funnily enough, despite that teacher being very capable, she lost all those games of Scrabble. So what that created for my child was success. And so she wanted to play Scrabble, and she wanted to get better at it. And the only way you can get better at it is to understand English. And that was the changing point. So she went from nothing to being able to read by the end of the year. An absolute miracle. From someone who couldn't tell you A from B to being able to read. Sure, her level was nowhere near like anybody else in the class, but it's still a miracle. So, the various things. So our house, these are all from our house. Our house, as I said, I wouldn't put anybody in our house. I'm sure that when any of our visitors came, went to the toilet and saw those signs saying, flush the toilet, wash your hands, all those crazy things. And they weren't little, they were about this big on the door, so just in case you were blind, you couldn't possibly miss them. And they're all over our walls and people. I thought, what a pack of lunatics. But what they did was they created a scenario where my daughter could be successful. They were simple, plain, obvious instructions that were there every day that she didn't have to think about it, she just had to do them. And every time she did one, man, it was better than winning the grand final. At least that's the way we make it. Because success for these kids, there's my toilet door, and they're you know a fair sign of what our whole house looked like. Because if you put that scenario in place, and every time they do it, you make a big song and dance about it, then that's success. And everybody wants to be successful, because the problem for all these kids is so many times they're told, you can't do it, you don't do it, you won't do it. But as Hayley said in her talk, maybe it's that they can't do it, and so they have to find a way to avoid doing it. And that's the problem for these kids, is that they don't have success. They don't win. And if they don't win, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you've got a disability or you're an Einstein. You don't keep doing something if you keep failing at it. You don't enjoy it. You don't want to do it. You don't want to be engaged. It doesn't mean anything until you stop trying. I mean, these kids, rather than stop trying, they manipulate the situation to suit themselves. They're very good at that. So we put all those in place because traditional responses for FASD kids and kids with neurodisability, they don't work. They don't understand them, so you can't keep going them down that pace. I think, the old saying, if you've yelled at a child 1,000 times to do the same thing and they're not doing it, it's not the child that is crazy. It's not the child that has the disability. You have to understand that they think and work in a different way because of what's happened to their cognitive thinking, and if you don't join that, then the result's not going to be very good. It won't be good for you, and it won't be good for them. So that's how I describe my kids' brains. So when we look inside ours, it's a lovely filing cabinet. When we ask for something, it comes out in lovely order, A, B, C. When my kids go inside, it's an explosion. So you've got to consider that every time you ask them a question or you want them to do something, they have to find the right file. You have to give them time, you have to give them the opportunity, and you have to give them the support. If they're wrong, it's not because they want to be wrong. It's just because they've got to go back in and find the right one. And you can do that in one of two ways. You can encourage them to go back, or you can yell at them and say, well, why did you bring that out? Well, I can tell you the second doesn't work. Obvious. We roll up to the race and the kid in the wheelchair, we wouldn't expect him to run it. The kid with the neurodisability who can't remember the course or which direction to go in, he's got to do it like everybody else without any support. And if he doesn't, we get angry at it. It just does not work. It doesn't work for my kids. It doesn't work for any child with a neurodisability. You have to think outside the box. And that's probably the critical thing that we got the teachers to do. Think outside the box. Give your kids opportunity. Do things that are different. And the school's very supportive, even the high school, that we take our kids away and take them to places where they can learn, because they like to learn by feel and see and touch. They don't listen to instructions, they don't survive with instructions real well, but if you get them to actually physically see it and feel it, they're very good at it. And to meet the right role models, put the right people around you, get the right people to support you. So for those that don't know, that guy on the left is Nate Jaiwai. He used to play for the Wildcats and was playing basketball with my young bloke up in Cairns when we went to visit him. And it's good for these kids to see people that are like them, look like them, that are successful, that are good, strong, upstanding people that can do the right thing. And he's a fantastic role model for these kids, and spent heaps of times with my kids. We visited Cairns about 8 times, so Nate spent a lot of time with the kids, giving time to help them to understand what you can do if you put the right places and successes in place. Because that's the key to these kids. Change the failure to success. Okay, because, you know, like I said, it doesn't matter how many times you try, if you keep failing, you stop trying. But if you're successful, then you'll give it another go. But it's that perception of success. It's that understanding of what these kids are capable of doing down the track. Okay. Winston Churchill. Just because you're successful doesn't mean it's the end. But also because you fail doesn't mean it's the end either. It's the ability to get up and go again, and that's what we promote with our kids all the time. Doesn't matter where you came in that race, where you came in that test. It's the fact that you sat down and you did it and you tried your best that really makes the difference. And success comes in funny ways. It took us a long time to find the right things that made our kids tick. Find the strengths, find the things that help them be successful. Find things that they want to do, because then you can use them as a driving factor. But when we sit down, so as you can see, well, you probably can't, but she's a bit of a swimmer, Lena. But rather than sit down and say, if she doesn't do her schoolwork, you're not allowed to go swimming. I said, if you do your schoolwork, you go swimming twice. And I think that's the way you've got to look at these kids, is rather than, no point punishing them, you've got to motivate them. You've got to use what they're good at to motivate them. That's what she likes to do. So if I wanted to sit at school and do the right thing, I simply give her a reward. There's no punishment. If she doesn't do it, there's no action. She just doesn't get the reward. She's very smart enough to work out very quickly that if she did the right thing, she got lots of rewards. And that's what makes them tick. And we say that, despite neurodisability, they can't do things. The fellow on the left is her first Cairns Ironman. Now, I don't know whether you've ever done an Ironman, but all my biological kids all did one, and I watched them do it, and it takes a huge amount of organisational skills. Way more than I'd ever had. I'd be still running around out of the swimming pool trying to find my bike. But yeah, Lena was able to swim the swim, run to the bike, get changed, get on a bike, ride a bike course, get back, get off a bike, put her shoes on, get her helmet off, and run the run course. And she's not allowed to see that course before she starts. So she's got to be able to work out who to follow, where to go. And she's now done about, probably about 10 of them, I suppose. So getting those things that motivate them, that help them, are the things that will get them through life, make them successful. So, and we have tried every single sport that there is possible to find out what makes them tick. Ironically enough, one runs and can run and run and run, the other swims and swims and swims. That's the thing they like, and I've come to realise there aren't so many rules and distractions in those sports. They're simple, they're basic. They're things they can do without thinking and be successful at, and that's why they like them. They might be able to play basketball and netball, but they've got to worry about the rules and the umpire and all the other players. But when they run, it's just think about that white line at the end. That's all I've got to do. Get to that white line as hard and fast as I can. And when she swims, all she's got to think about is right arm, left arm kick, right arm, left arm kick. It's not that difficult. And then it gives them great satisfaction, because more often than not, when they get to the end, they've been successful. And the last thing I'd like to say is to consider the fact that these kids, the statistics state that the average age of a FASD person, I think it's actually gone down from 35 of late, so that's even worse. I think it's now down to 34. 35 years of age. There are lots of reasons for that, but none of them are acceptable. 80% of FASD people in the current society are not likely to be able to be integrated into the community in any sort of normal fashion. They're likely to either end up homeless, in jail, in some form of medical institution because of mental health issues, living on the street, alcoholics or drug addicts, or even worse, part of the suicide statistic. But all those are unacceptable. And we as a community have to take responsibility to change that, because whether you like to accept or admit it, it costs us all. So not only does it ruin that child's life and that family,